Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar. We're very happy that you're here with us. Our topic today, the webinar, is Security Policy Management in Hybrid Cloud Environment. Today's webinar is sponsored by Tufin. My name is Mitch Ashley. I have a couple of roles here today. I'm going to be host and moderator. I'm also going to be presenting as an analyst, so we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's take a few housekeeping items here. We are recording the webinar, and we will send an email with a link to the recording and slides and things like that that you can download later. So please, you don't have to take detailed notes. You can write down a few things, but you'll get to review the video if you want to, or the slides as well. So all participants are going to receive that email not too long after the end of the webinar. Also, I know my partner here that is talking from Tufin today. We both love questions. We really love to talk about this topic and explore that, both share our experiences, but more so really kind of dig into what things you're maybe wrestling with or experiences that you may have. So we'd love to have your questions. Please enter those into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar software. We'll either get those during our conversations. We're going to be talking to a few slides first, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, but we'll try to address those along the way as well. So let's move to our topic, security policy management in hybrid cloud environment. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce my co-presenter, Colby Dyess, who is Director of Cloud Product Management with Tufin. Welcome, Colby.
Howdy. Good to see you, Mitch.
Good to see you. You and I have been on TechStrong TV, done a few things together, so we've had a lot of conversation about this topic, so I'm excited to explore this.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, and thanks to everybody for joining or watching the replay. It's good to have you.
Absolutely. So why don't we get into it? Colby, you're running the slides, so if you would advance. I thought I would share a little bit of information kind of starting at kind of a macro view. We'll get down to the hybrid environment. I'm not seeing your slide advance if you're advancing, Colby.
That's pretty funny. All that work and it didn't work out.
Still didn't go. Okay. There we go. There we go.
You good?
Hopefully you don't have to do that for each one, but I don't think it's news to anyone. But I also, as we think about going forward, the last year or so, we always talk about COVID and some of the impacts of it. Setting aside the personal impact to our lives for the moment, respectfully doing that. But we've really entered into an age of ongoing disruption and increased or rapid acceleration. And what I mean by this is the changes that we've seen happen just within the last 9 to 12 plus months are not things that are going to slow back down once we kind of get back to normal, whatever that normal is. I don't think it's the normal we had before. But really, businesses have changed how they think about technology and the role that technology is playing as well. Software, frankly, has become a huge, major part of many businesses' strategy, not just an operational function. Matter of fact, you'll occasionally hear companies talk about, we're not an airline, we're a software company, or we're not a manufacturer, we're a software company. Well, are they really a software company? No, but software is not only an enabler, it's a differentiator. It's something that allows them to both respond competitively, also defensively, and business strategies are being built around an organization's ability to deliver capabilities through software. Now, software involves a whole stack of things, including cloud providers and the management of that and security of all those things. But my point is that I expect we will continue to see aggressive, rapid acceleration of more digitization, digital transformation of business processes, services, et cetera. You just think about the next few months going forward into 2021. We're not going to get rid of contactless services. We're going to continue offering those things. That may be actually a permanent state of business where folks have gotten groceries delivered at home and, why do I want to go into a grocery store anymore, or whatever it might be, or I still may want to. So we're in this kind of hybrid environment, at least in terms of how we deliver and receive services. That also a thing that's very common that happens within economic downturns is all your partners and suppliers also, of course, have impact. But those impacts may be different timing, different amount, the response to it may be different. Sometimes companies double down in their R&D or in their investment in infrastructure to really help propel themselves out of an economic downturn. Supply chains can get disrupted. When you go back to say, okay, I've got more orders coming in, we need more quantity, suddenly those suppliers may not be there anymore. They may have had to pivot or maybe aren't around. Maybe they've gone out of business or they got sold. So the economic disruption also has a big impact on our digital transformation strategies. And some of it are things that we can enable and control, and some of it are things that just part of doing business, and we have to find new ways of doing that. So Colby, if you go to the next slide, please. And I'll get to our hybrid cloud security topic in a moment. I'm getting there. Okay, we're coming out of the clouds, kind of see the land. We can see the landing strip here, not too far away. But we've done some research at Accelerated Strategies around a lot of what's happening in digital transformation. Everything from the future of work, how people are working, but also their investment in security and some of the challenges that they're running into moving into the cloud, especially when they've accelerated very quickly. One of our research projects, we had over 50% of respondents tell us that they have significantly increased their move to the cloud or to multiple cloud providers. And those are just some of the responses of who you might expect to see in a cloud environment. There are many more. I'm not showing you all of those, but these were responses for people that were in multiple cloud providers. So it's a mixed environment. Sometimes not by choice, can be because of acquisition, can be because of business partner requirements. If you're doing business with Amazon, they might want you in their cloud, and you might be in Azure or something like that. So we're very much in this era of moving more rapidly to the cloud, and it's easily substantiated by data, and especially to multi-cloud. It's not uncommon, especially for folks a little farther down the path in their digital transformation cloud migration journey, to be working with multiple cloud providers. And there are all kinds of reasons to do that. But Colby, if you would go to the next slide.
You
I'll
got
share
it.
with you some other research. You're awesome co-pilot. I'm going to hand over the controls to you here in a minute. You look like you're flying the plane already, but we won't get to that in just a minute here. Part of our research was also looking at, okay, so you're doing lots of things at once. You're moving to the cloud, you're doing hybrid clouds in some cases, you're doing this digital transformation of applications, business processes, automation, all kinds of things happening at once. And some of it pretty forcefully, very quickly, not necessarily planned as well as you might plan it if you had had the opportunity to stage it out, but you had to adjust to remote work or adjust to contactless delivery, or turn down some of your supply chain and brought up other suppliers in the process. So as you think about moving to the cloud, and part of our research was looking at both cloud and also cloud native applications. Now, we're not just lifting and shifting things, we're also recreating or building new applications in new architectures like cloud native, containerized applications, Kubernetes for container orchestration, microservices, service mesh, things like that, observability, how do we manage all those things? And oftentimes as we make those steps forward, there's some things that naturally follow it or sometimes even lead it. And one of the concerns within the cloud, especially across multiple providers, is security. Now, security teams, and I'll show you some information about security teams and how they're working more closely with software teams, really are concerned about multiple things expressed in this diagram in particular. You keep in mind, these are concerns across not one cloud provider, but multiple, because they all don't offer the same services. You may be using a monitoring service or a cloud firewall or something more sophisticated application firewall, whatever it might be, security services, key storage, all kinds of things. In one cloud provider and the same kind of thing in a different cloud provider, or you're trying to orchestrate that across multiple clouds. But in our research showed that over 40% of the respondents were concerned really about all attack vectors, all attack services across their applications, because the environment has changed so much, you can't make any assumptions. Applications are being rebuilt, they're more porous, they potentially are more vulnerable. You're going to an API-based application structure. where the application's built on calling itself through APIs as opposed to APIs being an external egress-ingress approach. We're doing this within different stacks of software, whether it's containerized or other. And we're also interfacing across multiple applications that may be distributed in one or multiple clouds. So it's really a complex environment that we bring into ourselves to manage, and the security for that can be also very complex. And it's some of the things you might expect. Of course, container security is a concern as more folks implement Kubernetes and Docker and things like that. But also core platform vulnerabilities, and you're implementing technologies, of course, to combat or address some of these vulnerabilities. Again, either through your own technology that you're acquiring and taking to the cloud, or services that you're acquiring through the cloud provider itself. So it's a pretty complex environment, getting more complex, and the ability to deal with all of that, because the pace of change is increasing so much more rapidly. Our ability to manually or just use humans, throw more people at the problem, is really, the efficacy is really reducing greatly, because we just can't have enough people to manage the process, manage the complexity, make sure that we've got a consistent policy implemented across multiple applications, multiple software stacks, multiple providers in cloud or on-prem in addition to that. So it is important to consider how you're going to both understand what you have in all of your infrastructure, all of your application stack and your applications, and then how you are applying and governing security policies and technologies across those environments. These are just a few of the vectors that we can talk about. Colby, if you go to the next slide. Speaking of cloud platforms and cloud native architectures, just brought this up as an example that it isn't just writing or building containerized applications. We think about cloud native in particular for newer apps or apps we may be re-engineering, but also many times, I mean, there's so many varieties of Kubernetes, whether you download it yourself and kind of go it alone, which can be a pretty complex process, or you're using a service provider of some type, could be the cloud provider. And we have some data here showing that 34% of people are using Kubernetes through an offering, managed service from a cloud provider. So this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, that it isn't just your software stack. Your software stack is really interlaced and maybe heavily based on services that are being provided by the cloud provider or third parties. Now, thinking about that across a hybrid or a multi-cloud environment, that gets complex very fast. And there's differences between those services and how you can manage those. So data is also a concern, in this research in particular, we're talking about containerized databases, and that are also being provided through a service through a cloud provider. So some type of storage database technology. Again, more things to manage. Next slide, if you would, Colby. Okay, last slide, I promise, and then you've got controls to bring her on in here, Colby. So I thought something else worth showing you, in the DevOps world, we talk about DevSecOps and shift left and security teams working more closely with software creation teams, more integrated into the software build process. And I think, Colby, you're going to be talking about some of that a little bit coming up here. There's an interesting stat that we did in some of our research we completed late last year around the engagement of InfoSec teams, security teams, with software teams in particular. So in thinking about the skill gap, how does a security team understand all of this software technology and how to secure it, that as well as the software teams, and doing the same and also building applications on top of that? So kind of thinking about roughly half, almost 47%, that InfoSec teams are much more engaged with the applications team and of course with operations. But there's also a gap in understanding some of these technologies as well. And of course, that leaves a little bit over half where they aren't actively engaged yet. My own, just anecdotally, my own personal experience is the cloud can be a catalyst for bringing those teams together, because we've got to solve problems very quickly, got to secure the environment, all the full application stack and the environment that we're working with. So sometimes adversity, challenges, disruption is also an opportunity to do new things, do things differently, engage differently. And even in the remote work world that we're in today, teams are engaging in more cross-functional teams on software development, security, and deploying those things into the cloud. So with that, let's get into a little bit more about hybrid cloud and security across that environment, if you would, Colby. Here's the keys to the plane.
Right, I get to take over the flight controls. So that's excellent. Hey, so I think it's actually a really good context for the conversation here. We know that organizations have been moving to the cloud. We understand that it's accelerating. This point here that I'm leaving up, which I think really shines a light on some of the problems that I've seen when I work with customers, that they were not seeing the security team really fully engage with the folks who are managing and responsible for cloud and configuring the cloud environments. And even those groups that are engaged find that they really lack the skills to effectively help or efficiently, I should actually say, efficiently help the cloud teams properly secure their cloud environment. And yet, I continue to remain hopeful that the organizations will actually be able to leverage the resources that they have available to be more effective at securing hybrid cloud environments. And I'll talk a little bit about how that can happen, why I still have hope about that, even with where we're at today. But maybe I should explain a little bit about maybe who I am or where I'm coming from. So I'm the director of cloud products, like we mentioned at the top. I work for Tufin. I don't suppose that everyone here would be really familiar with Tufin. As an organization, we've been around for about 15 years. We've helped and we continue to help our customers manage their complex network environments. And well, historically, that had been a lot of on-prem stuff. Of course, our customers continue to grow. It was from on-prem to private clouds, to hosted environments, to public cloud, and of course, microservices, Kubernetes, serverless functions, the whole bit. Our customers, the kind of environments that I'm working at, helping our customers deal with is to get visibility into their hybrid environments, to understand what is talking to what and whether or not those things should be able to talk to one another. And I don't mean like individuals so much as I mean applications, resources connecting to other resources. So we help organizations get that visibility and help to manage the complexity. I'm not here to pitch the product. I'm actually here to talk about the environment that the folks are trying to deal with and some of the, I think, operational changes that they should look to make that may be very well independent of product. So let me talk a little bit about what I see when I'm working with our customers, right? The 2,000 plus customers that we have. There's a lot of great information that we've gathered from working real closely with them. We've seen pretty consistently why organizations move to cloud or look to adopt a DevOps or a GitOps practice. By and large, it's about improving the overall agility of the organization. So I know a lot of folks talk about moving to the cloud to save money, but that's rarely ever the actual case. It may cost you a bit more money to operate in the cloud initially until you learn how to use the cloud really well, but what you get almost immediately is a greater handle on agility. It's so much easier for developers and application teams to spin up resources, begin to build something new, try it out, test, fail fast, continue to iterate, like in ways that we could not easily do in the traditional environment. So generally, we're seeing more companies adopt cloud and Kubernetes platforms for the agility overall. What our customers normally talk to us about is now that they've been moving to the cloud and they're doing that to gain the agility, what they want do now is kind of get a handle on what's happening inside these cloud environments, because overall what they need to do is, as we note here, is they've got to reduce the risk. If you think of like the way that InfoSec has worked for the past 20 years, right? They have the tools, they have the process, they have the knowledge for how to observe what's happening inside their traditional environment, their on-prem environment, and traditional firewalls, load balancers, things like that. But when it comes to cloud, as Mitch pointed out, we're seeing that either the security team, the InfoSec team, either not engaged, or they really lack the skills, perhaps even the tooling, to get the information they need to understand what's happening inside these cloud environments. And so we see that InfoSec teams are really struggling to get that visibility, and that absolutely is a risk to the business. Like if you can't tell, whether or not you've got databases exposed to the internet, or as we all talk about the S3 buckets being exposed to the internet, it's crazy how often that happens. But the same thing we're seeing with Elasticsearch, the same thing we're seeing with databases, right? Teams trying to move very quickly are just kind of breaking the environment and exposing resources. So InfoSec team understands that that's a lot of risk to their business, and now they need to get better visibility into what's happening inside of cloud environments, and ultimately, all the work that they're doing, the application teams and the security teams, the InfoSec teams, they're really all just trying to make sure that the business is able to move very quickly with less risk and to not incur a lot of additional costs. And I bring up the cost thing a lot because I've seen that in many cases, businesses are like trying to slap a Band-Aid onto a particular security risk. They might fixate on a risk and then go and throw tools and products at it, and it ends up increasing the cost of development. It creates more complexity in applications and in operational management, and it's a bit of a challenge. And I think there's a really good opportunity to leverage the security controls that are already inherent in the cloud platforms. I'll talk a little bit about how I see that happening. So, for the 2,000 plus customers that we work with, and really only a few hundred of those I get to work with on a regular basis. They tell us these are some of the goals that they have in trying to address their needs for greater security in a hybrid cloud environment. And as I mentioned, that I think part of the challenge that we're seeing with an organization is as much as they want to go faster, as much as they want to avoid hampering the application teams, they are often just tackling very small point projects. So, like for instance, we saw a lot of emphasis on vulnerability scans. And so if you ask somebody, what are you doing to manage security in the cloud? They would just simply say, well, we're running vul scans. To be clear, you should absolutely be running vulnerability scans. You should be doing, lots of scans. You should be doing dynamic scans of the containers that are in your repos, in your registries. You should be doing static code analysis scans. There's just general hygiene you should do. But when it comes to when I say it's tactical, I mean, what a group only wants to try and focus on security for maybe just their AWS environment, or they're focusing on trying to button up security just for Azure environment or just one cluster. But in fact, the applications that we see most large organizations build, those apps span all these environments, right? You don't have a cloud native or a cloud only tool. Very often the cloud application is using resources on-prem, or it's using resources in another cloud, perhaps another vendor. And so if you only focus on the one cloud, then you forget about being able to protect the rest of the environment. And there's a couple reasons why we see organizations do that. Part of that is just, it's the history. If you're in the security world and you're familiar with using firewalls, you're not familiar with the cloud native security controls, you're probably going to suggest, hey, let's throw another firewall out there into the cloud. Or of course, you should be using a perimeter firewall for your clusters, but you'll need to make sure you align your Kubernetes network policy with the perimeter firewalls. Otherwise, your applications will break, right? Or you'll inadvertently overly expose them. that's a real hard thing for your traditional security folks to tackle because they don't tend to have the visibility. And it's also hard for the application teams to address because, well, they don't really have control over the firewalls, and application teams aren't typically the ones who have the primary responsibility for the security of applications. They're primarily responsible for configuring the application, maybe the application security, but they don't set the rules. So what I'd like to do is show like an example application. This is a really high level view of an application that a financial services customer of ours has. And what they were building was a cloud native application. I should put air quotes around cloud native because initially they considered it as cloud native, but in fact they were building the front end to a banking application that was hosted in a cloud environment. And in fact, a lot of the resources that it needed still were on-prem. So what we observed is a pretty common pattern where you've got an application that spans cloud and on-prem environments, and you've got traditional security teams that continue to operate the way that they do, with ticketing systems, and they manage the firewalls. They even manage the firewalls in the cloud environment. And you've got a cloud team that manages deploying the application, perhaps using like Terraform, because they're doing all infrastructure as code. So it's real easy for them to spin up a new application or change the configuration just from a config file. So the cloud team manages setting up that cloud environment and some of the cloud security controls. And then the traditional team manages the traditional firewalls, even the ones that are deployed in the cloud. So they're two different groups. They're not actually connecting. And even worse, if you're like only on the traditional side, like that's all you're going to see is what's on-prem, because you're used to seeing what's on-prem, and the firewall configurations. So if you've deployed like a virtual firewall in a cloud environment, it's probably all that you're seeing. You don't really get to see like the east-west traffic or the proper segmentation of an application inside of a VPC or a VNet. And sometimes those terms just go right over the head of a security team. Depends on how new they are to cloud. So if you have a security team that only sees this piece, right, they can't help the business be assured that the application resources out there are actually safe, right? If you think everything's going behind a firewall, but later on you find out in the newspaper, oh, it's your buckets, your Elastic search that was exposed because somebody misconfigured it and it wasn't actually behind a firewall. Like traditional security teams can't see that. It's a significant business problem. On the other hand, you got the cloud team that can see things like the security controls, the cloud native security controls, the security groups, the NSGs, the ASGs, your IAM policies. So they will often, what we've seen is cloud operators will tend to configure them kind of broadly because they're really focused on making sure that the application is functioning, and they expect that the security team, the traditional security team, will have taken care of most of the security by putting out a firewall and setting up all the rules for it. But of course, cloud team could accidentally misconfigure the environment. And I'm sure if you've been reading anything about security, cloud security, and the challenges there, then you would have come across the stats from other analysts about how like 99% of all security breaches in the cloud are going to be the result of a end user's misconfiguration. And that's not surprising when you consider how many different security controls there are, how complex they are, and the interrelationship of the security controls. Right, in a cloud environment, we're talking about combining your VPC settings, your security group settings, and your IAM policies, and your web application firewall. Like all of that together tells you which resources or assets are actually exposed. That's way more complicated than simply I've got a firewall and it exposes certain IP addresses. So there are a lot more moving parts, and the folks who are doing the configuration really aren't the security experts. So we need some way to help these groups kind of collaborate together. And that's what I really want to kind of impress upon the folks listening here is that in your organization you probably have a security policy. You probably have a set of rules that govern which types of assets, if not the specific assets, at least what types of assets should be able to connect to one another, right? You may well have somebody on the security team who understands I've got my PCI data that goes here, and I've got certain types of applications that are allowed to have access to those resources. And of course, most of us have the common sense policy of my dev environment should never be able to talk to my production environment. But most organizations end up setting up lots of different zones, or they consider segmenting their network in these business logical ways. So someone has that set. It's usually the folks from the InfoSec team or network security team. So a security policy exists. That security policy can be the general guardrail for how you should configure new environments. So if I'm going to provision a brand new cloud environment, I want to make sure that the VNet configuration and maybe some of the NSGs inside there comply with the security policy. And today, most organizations don't have a very easy way for these two teams, the security team and the cloud ops team, to collaborate. So while I think in every client so far that I've worked with, it's been a bit unique, like how they do it. But every customer that I've worked with so far has a path to make that happen. So you do have the folks who know the security, and they can work with the cloud ops team. But what we see is that the security team needs to begin to evolve some of their practices. So if you look at like on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, right, for traditional security teams, in order for them to manage the operation of the security controls, they ask everyone to submit tickets and go through this whole workflow, right? Somebody reviews the request, they look at it for risks, they look at it for whether or not it would be an allowed item to do. Maybe the access that you're asking for would break compliance with a government regulation. Right, that's the kind of checks that the security teams would have to do, and so that's why they force you through this process. But as we know, I think many of us know anyway, that those processes could take days and sometimes even weeks for someone to review that. That's an incredibly long time for someone to wait before they can get their application out into production, or even just a new module, a new service, right? We're building microservices-based applications. We're able to change them very rapidly. That's not going to help the business be more agile if I always have to wait a day or two for someone to review my request. So there has to be a better way. And the security teams probably continue to manage, I think will continue to manage the on-prem traditional stuff using these legacy sort of workflows. But it's really important for the security team to participate in the DevOps practice, or cloud ops or GitOps. They have to operate in that other practice now, really collaborating with the cloud ops teams to ensure that the security policy is something that that is being used perhaps as a test in this automation cycle. So wouldn't it be fantastic if you could define checks in your CI/CD pipeline to confirm the configuration? And in fact, we see this today. I was working with a client, working with clients all the time, but I was working with a client last week who had started to make that leap, that understood that, hey, I've got the security policy that my organization has already defined. Now, every time we spin up a new environment in either in Kubernetes or in one of the public clouds, we're going to create this cloud configuration, this item I just showed up in the middle of the screen, right? And that cloud configuration would be the same for every new environment. So every VNet I create, every VPC, every Google project, or every cluster I stand up, they can all be configured in with a standard template, and that standard template will have already been checked against the security policy. So as an organization, you can be assured the initial environment absolutely conforms to the policies that your business has. And then you could take it even a step further and say, well, let me go down to the actual services that are being developed. So if I add a new service that's going to rely on, let's say, a database, like a customer records database, like in that banking example I mentioned earlier, right? I go to the banking portal needs access to my records. So in order to make that call to the customer records, that means that application has to span its normal operating space to get to a PCI space. Now, maybe because it's a new application, there's no rule around allowing that application to connect to that service. But what's really amazing about this is if you already have a security policy that says these are the areas that should be able to talk to one another, and if it's not defined, it's not permitted, then when the development team is building new services and they say, oh, I'm going to end up needing that other resource, they can find out by testing in the CI/CD pipeline. You can test your application configuration against the policy to see whether or not it would break compliance. Right? If a change that dev put in was not compliant with the policy, you can find that out immediately, and you could give a build result to the dev team that would allow them to say, change like what the target endpoint would be. Perhaps they were trying to get directly to the database, but they in fact needed to go to an intermediary service, right? So I could, as a developer, I could know that I just need to change the endpoint that I'm going to communicate with. Or perhaps you need to have that access. And now I see that what I need to have in order for my application to function isn't permitted by the policy. I know at that point I can begin to submit the request to get the changes, to get it approved, so that by the time we're finished with the coding, we're finished with the testing, the policies will be in place, the network changes will be in place to allow my application to get into production without any delays. And that's kind of modeled in this concept here. Right? We talk about shifting left. I know very often we talk about shift left, we think, oh, I'll run more scans earlier in my CI/CD cycle. And what I'm suggesting here is to encourage you to incorporate your existing security policies into your CI/CD pipeline so that you can give a really early heads up to both the cloud ops and the application teams about what is and isn't permitted for this target production environment. So here's an example of what I was talking about. We could run in the CI/CD cycle. One of the tests is to compare the application configuration against the security policy. And if it doesn't comply, then you stop the build, right? You fail the build, you don't try to push it into production. And instead you dump out a list of the security violations or risky configuration. Hey, you have an application that's trying to reach an endpoint that you wouldn't be permitted to access, or hey, you've got an Elastic search resource and it's obviously directly exposed to the internet, right? It's clearly major issues. You can address those early in the life cycle, and then you should ideally have a mechanism that would allow you to not only discover that and cause the build to fail, and hopefully a lot of organizations have already set this up so when you've got your build failures, the dev team's alerted. And I think you can take that now and extend it so there's an opportunity now to alert the cloud operators and perhaps even the security teams. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to alert them to the security violation, but what I am suggesting is if your application changed and you need something that the policy doesn't allow, then you can automatically send requests. Like, I would encourage you to automate sending requests to the security team to review what you believe to be a necessary connection. So rather than wait for the manual process, rather than wait for some security audit, some manual security audit, actually automatically trigger the request for the access that your application is going to need. And so that's a way to help your security teams and your cloud ops and your application teams actually all work together. So security doesn't even need to know a whole lot about the exact application you're building or exactly where it's deployed. They need to only know at the time that you need to make a request what that request is about. So it's not like you got to keep them informed every single day, but you are just going to let them know early on the kind of request that's going to be coming their way. So some of the benefits of just starting with security policies, like taking the policies that you already have and incorporating them into your DevOps practices and your CI/CD pipelines, is that you'll see these issues earlier. And it really does allow an organization to move to the cloud faster, because you're able to see an impact of a configuration change or of a code change within minutes of having made those changes, rather than days or even weeks later. So that's a huge thing. And if you can do that as part of your CI/CD pipeline, you're not slowing down developers. You're not causing them to be delayed, right? So I mentioned here that this is really, it's not hindering the DevOps practice. This is definitely an enhancement. You're giving them something earlier in the process that they really need to have, right? Visibility into what is or might be broken. And another thing to point out, like, if the security team is focused on the security policy, the overarching set of rules for what should connect to what, they don't necessarily need to know all of the security control configurations, right? They don't have to know the differences between Azure NSGs and AWS SGs and Google Cloud Firewall, right? The security team doesn't have to overcome this major skills gap that they have right now. They can be alerted proactively through your CI/CD integration when there's an issue, and you can have a very targeted conversation with the security team. And if you're able to do this kind of work early, take the security policy, run the checks as part of your pipeline, then you don't need to necessarily go and deploy a whole bunch of new software to try and, let's say, enforce network traffic. And in fact, really what we've seen a lot is organizations are relying, kind of falling back on, let's just use firewalls because that's what we know. And yet in the cloud platforms and the Kubernetes platforms, there's so much core security built into those platforms. And we would really encourage organizations to use those. And in order to do that effectively, your cloud operators and your security teams are going to have to collaborate more often. Your cloud operators or cloud admins really need to know that the clouds that they're responsible for, are they complying with the policy, and if not, which policies that they're breaking. The cloud operator will know how to change the configuration to get themselves back into compliance, and you can do that without having to deploy proxies and sidecars and agents and all that, which really increase the complexity, increase the cost of operating these tools. I'm sorry, operating your applications, and ultimately, it's a viewpoint for Tufin that you actually need to remain vendor neutral. We've seen this before for organizations say that I'm going to go all in on a particular cloud, but the reality is you're never really all in on just one cloud. Like the kinds of organizations, the Fortune 2000 that we work with, they're on many clouds, even if they didn't mean to be, right? You're acquiring other organizations, you're bringing in other technology, you're bringing in third-party vendors, you're going to be operating in multiple cloud, in fact, probably multiple cluster environments. And so it's really important that the approach that you take to securing your environments is built around the premise that you're going to have to operate in multiple environments, and those environments will change over time. You can't count on a single vendor to address that. So, so I think it's really important to consider that most organizations have a security policy today, and that can be the guiding light for how you configure your cloud and Kubernetes environments going forward. It's just important about how you're going to integrate that into your practices. I can't give everybody here individual advice. I'd be happy to talk to each of you separately about what you're up to and how you might be able to make changes. But I can tell you that one thing that we've seen is most organizations aren't even sure like how bad their security posture is. They're sort of counting on it to all be okay. If you're on the cloud side, you're like, oh, the security team's got it handled. They'll take care of us. If you're on the security team, you might be thinking, but we've got it mostly handled because it's firewalls and we're only allowing everything to go through that. I'm going to tell you that getting visibility into what's actually running inside your cloud environment can be a crazy eye-opening experience. It's amazing how much is exposed, even though you might be using some of the security center tools that are built into the cloud platforms. It's incredible what we've seen, how open these environments are. And so I want to take a moment at least to encourage you to kind of get visibility into your own environment. And there are tools you can do to try that on your own. You could use the baked-in tools for the cloud platforms, for instance. Naturally, I want to share with you that Tufin has a solution for getting visibility into your cloud environment that's freely available. You can sign up and point the solution. It's called Tufin Secure Cloud. You can point it at your environment, and it can tell you what's deployed and what's connected to what. And whether or not it complies with your security policies. It's a great, simple thing to do. Take about 10 minutes to get visibility into what's happening there. And it's free, super easy. So I'm going to pause and switch over now to Q&A. Mitch, you awake? You with me?
I am right here, right along with you. It's hard not to jump in. You were you were talking about some really interesting stuff.
I forgot to take a breath.
Sometimes we do that. We've
So
got some questions from the audience. Why don't we try to take a few of those? How's it sound, Colby?
Great. Why don't we do that? And if you could see him, because I can't see him.
Okay. All right. I will tee them up for us. There's a couple of questions really asking around the question of how do you see an organization benefit from a solution like Tufin's if you're in the midst of a migration to workloads in the cloud. So you could probably extend that question out and say, you might be in the beginning of a migration, you may be in the middle of it. And I know you didn't go through all the things that Tufin does, but or you may be fairly mature in your cloud migration. What are maybe some of the approaches or tips, advice you'd have for people looking for a solution like yours?
Well, I would say first, doesn't matter where you are in your migration, your adoption of cloud, whether you're only just getting started and you're thinking lift and shift, or you're like all in and you're building brand new greenfield applications, it doesn't much matter. The business case for everybody is the same. You at least need to see what's in there and know whether or not those resources are exposed according to your security policy. So if there's a first action to take, it's simply to just get visibility. Mm-hmm. And it's independent of where you are in that transition to cloud. And on an ongoing basis, you're going to want to maintain that visibility. Because just because you looked at the environment once, confirmed that it was compliant with your policy, that doesn't mean it's going to remain compliant. I'd say a second thing is to make sure that no matter what approach you take, whether you build it yourself, you bring in a third party, you've got to make sure that that everything you're able to do for security checks is automated. It's really, really important that everything that you're going to do fits into the CI/CD cycle. The fewer human steps you take, the faster your business can go. And I know that gives some folks on the security side the heebie-jeebies, but it's incredible when you look at like how much time is burned just doing, just going through the backlog of change requests that security teams do, and they're nothing. They're like simple little changes that absolutely fit within the policy, but they haven't built in a mechanism for automatically checking. Does this request fit the policy? If it does, you should approve it and let it go through. You've got more interesting, more important things to do than to review and approve those things that are easily checked by robots. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting robots take your job. I'm saying let robots do the stuff that's boring so you can do something more interesting.
Yeah, I think to build on your point there, Colby, is one of the benefits of robots, of automation,
Mm-hmm.
is this is such a dynamic environment and changing so quickly. There's no way to keep up with what all the changes. I mean, just think about going to one or multiple InfoSec teams, cloud infrastructure teams, application dev teams, DevOps teams doing deployments. All of these things are, contributing to not just the migration, but new application capabilities too. I kind of think of an old analogy of, I used to tell people that when you wire up your wiring closet in your, on your floor in your office, there's only one point in time where it looks really good, and that's when you close the door the first time, right? And the next time it can be a minute later or 5 weeks later, and suddenly it's a mess in there because it
Yeah.
is just dynamic and everybody is in there doing lots of things.
Yep.
And so having a way of what do we have, and then how do I know what's changed? Because I know just from my own personal experiences, you just have to first get context. You have to know, where am I, before you can
Mm-hmm.
start to triage, diagnose, make decisions about new policies, whatever it might be. So
Yep.
you've got to set that context with accurate information from many, many sources. And I think that's a really central problem that Tufin addresses. Do you agree?
I do agree. Yep.
Okay, good, good. We got some great questions here. Um, So let's hit this next question. How do you effectively monitor hybrid cloud environments and not expose corporate data? Maybe take that in two parts and think
Okay.
about the security ops, the security side of this.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the challenges in a hybrid environment
Mm-hmm.
that are particularly kind of gnarly? And then what maybe about data across these environments? Because of course you have data everywhere, right? On-prem as well as in the
Mm-hmm.
cloud. What's your
Uh,
experience, Colby?
well, if I interpret the second half of that question as like, how do I ensure that my corporate data doesn't get exposed?
Absolutely.
That to me kind of fits into the first part. Um, uh, you need to have the visibility across the environments, and you need to have a way to run an analysis that spans multiple um, control planes, right? You've got your Kubernetes control plane, and maybe you're using Anthos in some spaces, and maybe you're using like Tanzu. Maybe you've rolled your own Kubernetes cluster, or you're running AKS, right? Even just in that kind of environment, you've got 3 different control points to try and get visibility into, and to continuously monitor to make sure that they're compliant with your policy. But then add to that the applications running in those clusters are maybe now also talking to an Azure SQL instance. So now your Azure environment has to be, locked down, has to comply to the security policy. It's really very challenging to get that visibility. I mean, obviously from Tufin's standpoint, that kind of complexity is where we thrive. We help organizations see, here's what's happening on-prem, private cloud, clusters that are hosted, clusters run by the cloud environments, the public cloud environments as well. Like, we see all of that and run all the math, run all the analysis, and can tell you, these resources are directly exposed to the internet, or this service over here is using a risky port. Right? We've got a lot of these tools built in, but it's the key there is that we're able to take what we know about your desired security policy and everything we know about these diverse environments, and we can, without you having to become an expert in any one platform, we can tell you exactly where the risk is, or where the risks are, and give you advice for how to resolve them.
It's a really important point. Yeah, you'd be an expert at all this stuff, right? And of course, a minute later, there's a new thing to be an expert in. Go back
Exactly.
to the closet analogy.
Exactly. We weren't all talking about Kubernetes 3 years ago. Not all of us. I mean, all of us are talking about it now. But so what's going to happen 5 years from now? What's the new technology that we're all going to be talking about and wondering, how the heck do I secure it? It's a bit of a challenge. So don't think that you're going to be able to keep up with all
There'll be
of
something
them.
else, right? Whatever
Yeah,
the next thing is. New
yeah,
container, already new container technologies people are migrating to.
yeah.
Uh,
And you want that flexibility too. You don't want to impede the development team, right? They should be allowed to pick the technologies that'll enable them to solve the business problem, deliver the new capability, innovate, ahead of the competition. So don't lock them down or
you
restrict them.
know, we probably have more questions. We have time left, but I want to
Oh,
try to get to a few more. Um, when it comes to lift and shift, is there an effective way to apply a solution like what you're talking about? Is there a difference in a lift and shift where you're taking an application largely, moving it as is for
uh,
the most part, or is it really kind of more just applicable to I'm rebuilding and building new in the cloud?
yeah, it's definitely very different if you were doing lift and shift versus like a greenfield application. With lift and shift, you've got a few options. Um, like you could just take the whole application, as many organizations have. It's like you pick it up and you took it from your data center and you put it into somebody else's data center. It's an easy enough concept. If you look at cloud environments, as compute, storage, networking, security. Sure. So it's just somebody else's computer, so you can pick it up and drop it over there. And most of the firewalls that you're used to using in your on-prem environment, there's virtual versions of that, so you could deploy that in the cloud environment too. So we've seen customers do exactly that model. That seems to usually be like an intermediate step. They're doing that because they want to quickly offload applications. They want to reduce their own data center footprint. But very quickly, the projects start to turn into, okay, how can I begin to leverage the cloud native security controls rather than have to use like the traditional firewalls? Or if you're not going to be replacing the traditional firewalls because they work well for you, that's what you're familiar with, you need to at least understand how you're going to configure the security controls of the cloud environment to complement what you're doing with the traditional firewalls. That kind of planning to know how to have these different security controls work together, those kinds of things typically takes a product, a tool like Tufin, or a systems integrator, somebody who can help you make the plans for that. There's not a general rule like I can say. I think that would suit everybody. We've seen lots of different paths, but one thing that I do know that's been pretty consistent is the rules that you have that govern, right? The policy that you have that governs who should have access to the application and what resources that application connects to. That policy should follow the application into the new environment, and you should really be focusing on ensuring that when you move the application over, the policy goes along with it, and you make any modifications you need to in the policy, and then let that drive any changes you're going to make into the rest of the infrastructure. I hope that made sense.
It does. I mean, you bring up access control policies. You were talking about misconfigurations before, which is one of the
Yep.
most frequent attack vectors or reason that folks get in.
Yeah.
And you're doing that across environments you may not know as well as your own data center or when you had one, or
Right.
maybe the one cloud that you're a specialist in, but you're now moving into a second or a third or a hybrid environment.
Yep.
And those having a governance or a policy process that you can push out and
Yeah.
manage across those environments. I mean,
Yep.
it's just hard for me to imagine doing it by hand anymore.
I can't imagine doing it by hand. That'd be crazy. Yeah, but and I don't want to lose the nuance that you get to start with the policies that you already have, like
Mm-hmm.
right, and let that policy guide how you're going to configure these cloud environments. That's an important opportunity that folks have to move very quickly into cloud and retain security that we haven't seen most organizations kind of adopt. Right, they're kind of going about the other way around. Actually, they can go faster if they start with a security policy.
Well, wonderful. We're just a few minutes before the top of the hour. I want to respect everybody's time so we can get to our next Zoom meeting, right? So let me close out by thanking you, Colby Dyess, for your great talk and presentation, and hopefully some of the stats that we talked about around the analyst work that we've been doing really dovetail. I think they fit very nicely together. It's interesting from different perspectives. We're seeing many of the same things. So awesome talk. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Cole.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for the context, and it's good to present with you again. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Absolutely. So we do want to announce our gift card winners. We have 4 winners, and they are Neil R., Chad T., Michael M., and Gerald H. And the good folks at securityboulevard.com will be reaching out to help you get a hold of those great gift cards. Well, on behalf of Colby and myself, it's been our pleasure meeting with you today and talking about hybrid cloud and security and policy management and things we can do to make our lives more manageable and more secure. Today's webinar was sponsored by Tufin, and we'd like to thank you for spending an hour with us. You know, your time is extremely valuable. We all seem to be working harder and more in this age of remote work, and the fact that all of you would spend an hour with us, we're honored that you would do that. We hope you've used your time well. So we wish you the best. If there's any questions that we didn't get to, we'll be reaching out to you separately. Thank you, Colby. Thank you, audience.